This meeting is being recorded. No, stop.
All right, call the meeting to order. Welcome everybody to special Bartlett board meeting today. So we'll talk a little bit about housekeeping and stuff in just a minute. But before that, I'm going to have Deb Johnson here, the Vice President, read the land acknowledgement.
Speak loud.
Unishchich to the Tlingit, Haida, Tsimshian people. We respectfully acknowledge them as the original inhabitants of Southeast Alaska. Bartlett Regional Hospital is located on the homelands of the Akwon and are grateful to provide services in your ancestral homeland and to be part of this community.
Thank you, Deb. Anita, you want to do a roll call?
Jim Cohn,
Here.
Max Mertz,
Here.
Dr. Raster,
Here.
Lisa Peterson, here. Al Geiger, Dr. Jones,
Here.
Kelly Deering,
Present.
Deb Johnston,
Here.
and Kenny Solomon Gross.
Here. Thank you. Can I get an approval of the agenda?
I'll second.
Right. The agenda is approved as is. So good evening, everybody. I'm glad to see everybody's here, both in person and online. I'm going to speak up as loud as I can. So if anytime you can't hear us, let us know. As you guys all know from our last meetings and what's been going on the last few months, the hospital's in current financial challenges. And this underscores the need for the community engagement. So today, it's really important that we, as a board, reach out to the community so we can find out what you guys are thinking about the services that you want to have in the hospital here. As the board navigates through these financial difficulties, community input is crucial in shaping the future of healthcare services in Juneau. Our commitment to transparency and community involvement reflects our dedication to providing the best possible care for our community. The Juneau and Greater Southeast Alaska community, we believe, a valued community hospital and want Bartlett to succeed and be healthy. So again, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to hear public comment on community healthcare priorities and services identified as non-core, meaning they fall outside the hospital's enterprise fund. Tonight's meeting will begin with an overview of the state of the hospital's finances, including proposed non-core program recommendations. We'll then move to public question and answer on the information presented before taking public comment. So we're going to do a question and answer piece here. So you guys could directly ask the board members, or we have our CEO here, Ian Warden, and we have Joe, who's going to do our presentation on our finances here in just a minute too. Oh, I'm sorry, and Kim. I'm sorry. I don't know. I see you there, Kim, and Kim too. And so we could absolutely get your guys' questions right to them. And then after the question and answer period, then we'll be able to take you guys, anybody that wants to come up and give us comments, just give us your public comments or stuff like that. We'll take that at the end after the question and answer period. Today we got there was at least 25 emails that we've already been submitted. So I believe the board, I got a chance to read those today. So we've already kind of started the process and hearing public input on what service lines they want, what they want our hospital to look like. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Joe Warner, and actually we'll turn it over to Ian then.
All right,
We'll start with Ian.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ian Ward. I'm the interim CEO. Just a little bit about my background. I've been in healthcare management since about 1979. I've worked in some very large facilities, including my last position was the chief operating officer for Virginia Mason Franciscan Health, about 11 hospitals down in the Seattle area. It's been a real pleasure working up here. But one of the things I'd like to go through with you is how we've approached looking at the organization, so you have some background how we are looking at it, what our concerns are. So let's go to the first slide. That's the, oh, I have to speak up? Okay. Let's go through to the first slide that has the graph on it. That one, you can see two lines coming down. They're defined a little bit differently, but the basic story is that just like any other business, just like any other entity, just like even your family, we work based upon cash flow. And as you can see, our cash flow has been dropping and had a crossover point where operations took out more cash than it was adding in. That crossover point was between fiscal year 2019, fiscal year 2020. Okay, so an enterprise fund is a definition by the city or government that needs to be able to be self-sustaining. So when you see cash drop below expenses, right, you're no longer self-sustaining. So our belief is that we need to get back to a self-sustaining level, which means that we have to improve our revenues and improve our expense management. And it also means that in order for us to be healthy, to continue on for the next foreseeable future, for every dollar that we bill, right, we need to get 3 cents out of that that's extra after our expenses. The reason we need that is we need an extra to be able to invest in new programs. For example, like a Da Vinci robot, building overhead. We have parking issues, that we need to do. So you need a little bit extra, but it's only 3 cents out of every dollar of billed revenue. And that's not happening here. And so sustainability is what we've been asking our leadership, Joe as the CFO, and then Kim as the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Nursing Officer, to really look at. And so let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about how we do that. The first thing is that we have to reduce our costs. There's no question about that. Our costs have increased over the last number of years, some of it related to COVID, some of it related to just personnel creep, but our volumes have not increased concomitantly with those. In other words, you want to keep your cost increases somewhat consistent with your volume. So we've engaged the COO and the CFO, as well as the Executive Director of Human Resources, to manage every FTE that comes in. Do we need them? Where do we need them? Is it the right mix? Is it an LPN, a nurse? In addition to that, with COVID, we saw a lot of need for the increase in what we call travelers. Travelers are nurses, typically nurses and others that are coming from another state. And their cost is typically about 30 to 40% more expensive to be able to cover shifts and things of that nature. So we not only have maybe many FTEs in the wrong place, but we're paying too much for them. So we're working on that. Contract review. We looked at every contract, or we're looking at every contract, and we're asking two questions. Number one, is it necessary for the clinical process, or is it unnecessary? If it's unnecessary, we then look at, is it a Juno contract or out-of-state contract? If it's unnecessary out-of-state, we are shutting those contracts down. So we're not only focusing on what is necessary to run our clinical operations, but also we're making sure that it gets a second level review if it is a unnecessary contract in Juno, because we don't necessarily want to balance our financial issues on other businesses within the Juno community. That doesn't necessarily help. IT is a very expensive thing at hospitals. As you know, under the Obama administration, they mandated IT systems for electronic health records. That was a good thing. The problem with it's a very expensive thing, and we're looking at all of our IT systems to make sure we don't have duplicate or underutilized IT systems. So, for example, we know that Microsoft 365 has Teams in it, and we don't need Zoom. Why pay for a contract with Zoom when we can do all that work through Teams? So we're going through every part of it. And then finally, are we allocating capital to revenue generating activities. So that's one thing. The other thing we did is we then said, in 1965, when this facility was handed over to the city and became an enterprise fund, what should be in a core hospital and what is non-core? We basically said hospital and public health. I think it's been picked up in the media as core, non-core, but it's really the same concept. And so there's when you look at a hospital has to have an ED, that's mandated. It has to have ways of telling if you're sick, that's lab, and that's diagnostic imaging. It has to take care of patients. That's pharmacy, that's surgery, that's nursing. So that's what a core operations of hospital is. Then we said, okay, what is not necessary to that? We started saying, these are the areas that are not necessary for a basic level hospital. And that includes home health, hospice, ABA, crisis center, BOPS, which is behavioral outpatient facility, which we then have redefined it back as part of operations. Let me see, also rainforest recovery. And did I miss anyone? Crisis center. We also started taking a look at hospitals around the state and other states to see what is also part of hospital operations. It's not unusual in the state to have a nursing home part of hospital operations. So Wildflower Court, which is a new entity, was then again defined as core. So hospital, Wildflower Court, and BOPS, which is behavioral outpatient services, all kind of defined as core, everything else. Then we started saying, okay, we need to analyze each one of these. And so we developed a P&L. What are the revenues, which is pretty easy to get. And then what is our direct expenses, which is also pretty easy to get because we know who works where. Most of the direct expenses tend to be personnel. We started looking at these program analytics. Is it a strategic margin? Reimbursement for the services rendered. Most people don't realize that hospitals get paid differently depending upon who's paying. So for example, if it costs us $1 to do something, Medicare pays us close to the dollar, not margin, just the cost. Your state pays about 40 to 45 cents on the cost dollar, and insured typically pay maybe $1.50. So if you have a high Medicaid use, you go out of business. That's a well-known fact for anyone that works in the industry, is that the states pay way below cost, even though in 1966, they were required to pay cost, but they've gotten waivers in the 80s. So if you have a high reimbursed, if you have a entity that has a significant amount of Medicaid, you have issues in being there. We also looked at external subsidization. There are a number of our facilities that have been subsidized before, either through grants or not permanent, but other types of forms of subsidization. And we started looking at where has that subsidization gone. We looked at whether or not we can grow. We looked at productivity. You can look up physician productivity in the United States and nursing productivity throughout. We started looking at, okay, how are we staffing relative to our volumes? We already talked about trying to reduce the traveler's cost. That's hard to do when you have a hard time getting folks up here, professionals up here. One of the things that HR and our COO, CNO did is they did some Let's Grow Our Own programs. So CNAs and LPNs are being grown and we're getting them on board so those travelers can go. We set ourselves a time frame to improve. If I do things too quickly, I can make mistakes, right? And that's the last thing you want to do is make a mistake that affects the clinical outcomes. And then we looked at fixability. How easy is it to fix a program? When Joe goes through this, what I want you to keep in mind is that if our direct costs far exceed our net revenues, in other words, salaries and benefits are in excess of our net revenues, it's a very hard program to fix because we also have other costs that need to go there. For example, like IT is a big one. Utilities is another one. We get a charge for facility maintenance from the city. So keep in mind when we look at that fixability, can we fix this through cost reduction or volume increases, right? So just keep in mind, if you're losing money on a per unit basis, adding volume doesn't help you, right? So those are some of the things that we had to look at. And Joe came on board in early November. I came on board, I think, the last day of October. So we've done a lot of analytics before we even brought it to this point. But now we need you to see the things that we see, help us make some determination of what to do and how to do it. And right now, there's no easy answers in healthcare because the amount of funding has been drying up over the years. So in the state budget, they increased the state budget for Medicaid by 0.5%. So those are the things that we're dealing with. And I know this is very frustrating for everybody. It's frustrating for me, but I'd like to turn it over to Joe and he can walk through program by program to help you understand what we're looking at.
Thank you, Ian. Before we turn it over to Joe, so we'll hold questions to the end and then we'll ask them then. And a couple of housekeeping things. Restrooms are right outside the door there if you need them, and exits either way if you need there in case of an emergency or anything like that. With that, go ahead, Joe.
Thanks, Kenny. So on this slide, we kind of go over the background of what's going on here at Bartlett. We've been running a $10 million annual budget deficit over the last couple of years. We presented that on the cash graph, as you saw. It's slightly different because of depreciation, the way we have the cost set up. This is important to note because if we don't change any of these programs, at the current time, we have about 3 years cash left on hand if we don't change the programs we have in the mix we have. So that's kind of what led us to start this discussion. We have the proposed timeline up there. We've gone through several meetings already with the board. We had a joint meeting with the CBJ on May 29th. We've opened up the community feedback period, and that'll go through June 19th. And then we have we'll take all your recommendations, all your feedback to the Bartlett Finance Committee on June 24th. They'll review that and take forward action items or suggestions to our Bartlett Board of Directors on June 25th. The first program we're going to kind of talk about, I'm going to talk about the hospital, Wildfire Report BOPS. It's that left column up there. And so what we have up here is we have several financial categories. The first one is direct revenue. So that's the money generated by the program. These are receipts on each of the programs. The direct expenses are the costs related to each of those programs. Then we have operating margin. So with the hospital, it loses roughly $5.6 million annually on operations. And then we look at overhead allocation. So these are the costs that aren't included in the other programs, which are lumped in the hospital. So this is going to be facilities, environmental services, billing services, general accounting services, things of those nature. And then we have facilities broken out separate there, so you can see what it costs to actually run those separate buildings. And with that, we have an allocated operating margin. So this is kind of the gain or loss on each of these programs. And I'll go over each of these categories as we work through these different slides. At the bottom of this slide, we have the options matrix. And this is kind of an abbreviated version from before. And since we're just looking at a set of these programs, we broke it down to the options related to each of these, which are to subsidize with a permanent subsidy or close or change of ownership. So the first one we're going to talk about is RC, which is Rainforest Recovery Center. So for FY25, it has a budget of $1.77 million on direct expenses of $2.55 million, which is an operating loss of $782,000. With that, they have overhead allocations of $1.2 million, facilities allocations of $1.6 million for an allocated operating margin loss of $3.8 million. So when we look at that specific program, the two options that were being considered are a permanent subsidy, closure of the program, or a change of ownership management of the program. So when we look at the history and background of Rainforest Recovery, this is a program that was gifted to Bartlett back in 2000 for management from CBJ and full operations in 2004. With that, it came with some tax revenues in the form of tobacco tax and alcohol tax with some general fund tax as well. And it also had one state grant that was reoccurring over the first 27 years of the program. Both of those funding sources have dried up in recent years with.
Hey, Joe.
Okay, I didn't-
Yeah, I'm having a hard time hearing you in the back. Can we try a mic just to see if that
Can
helps?
you hear me better now?
Yeah, but online, if there's feedback, please just drop a note in the chat.
Thank you. And so when we look at the subsidy of the program, in 2005, 2010, 2015, and 2023, the ROC was subsidized $1.66 million up to $1.8 million over those various years from CDJ. In 2024, they received $0 in tax money. The only subsidization the program currently has is a reoccurring state grant that is valued at $270,000 that we received in FY24. ROC is currently losing $655,000 during the first 8 months of this fiscal year. It's projected to lose $782,000 for FY25. Ian talked about the payer mix in Medicaid. 89% of the patients that go to ROC are Medicaid patients, with 5% commercial and 4% private. It is worth noting here that 50% of the patients are surge beneficiaries as well, with most of those having commercial insurance or Medicaid as a primary payer. 40% of the patients population are CPJ residents. We've actually debated this number a few times with staff. It's actually varied over time. We've seen as low as 35% and as high as 48%. 40% is kind of an average number for CPJ population in this program. It's currently operating at base staff, which means that the staff that we need to serve the full complement of beds, 16 patients, is the same staff that we need to serve 1 patient. There are currently 4 residential treatment programs in Southeast Alaska, including ROC and 30 programs statewide. ROC cared for 316 unique patients during the last 3 years, 25 patients receiving care more than once. With that being said, there have been 139 unique patients served at ROC in year-to-date 24. On performance analysis, we have the stats, patient days, outpatient visits, collections per patient day, max capacity potential, actual collections, and operating costs. So these are important because what we try to look at is how much do we collect on each patient that's in there per day. And so what's the max potential for collections if we're staffed or have patients at 100% capacity throughout the year. And so in FY23, if the program ran at 100% capacity for the entirety of the year, it would have collected $2.8 million, which is below the direct expenses of $2.9 million. The same rings true for FY24 and 25. It would have, with a full max capacity potential, it would cover operating costs, but not overhead allocated costs. Ian touched base on wages and benefits exceeding net revenue. And then this program is by 1.4 million in 2023, 900,000 in 24, 522,000 budget for FY25. Direct payroll costs, pharmacy net revenue is a difficult problem to fix. Service reduction would not have a significant decrease in operating costs as well. We are at base staff, and so that's what most of the costs of this program are generated. The program would need to operate at 100% capacity, as stated before, to cover staffing costs in FY24. The program closure would have minimal impact on the emergency department. That was from Dr. Simon, I believe. We've talked about there are other impacts that we've evaluated and we talked with staff that we had to consider as well. With that, we have a proposed recommendation there in the blue box at the bottom. Determine whether the third party can be identified to take the program over in full environment. If this is not realistic, closure of the program. This program could be retained if the CBJ simply chose to provide a permanent subsidy. This is a difficult financial recommendation and in no way a reflection of the individuals who provide and receive these services. Included this slide in this deck. This is the first time this has been presented. This actually goes over the subsidization that we received from CBJ going back to over the last 20 years. So in FY03 to FY19, it went from 1.8 little over $1 million to a high of $1.493 million in FY19. With COVID coming on and affecting the community, the subsidization dropped significantly in FY20 and 21. And as you can see, it's dropped to zero in FY24 and budget FY25.
Hey, Joe. So just for 1 second, I'm just going to pass it over to our finance chair for a second, Max Mertz. He's going to just talk a little bit about.
I just wanted to give a little bit of background. I know a lot of y'all have all the background on Juneau Recovery Hospital and Rainforest Recovery Center. It's been around for a long time. It was primarily a grant-funded program until about 93 or 94. And during that, up until 1999, it was operated by the city and borough of Juneau. So there were two funds actually that were part of accounting funds. There was mental health, and then there was chemical dependency. Mental health had its own set of issues, and it was basically spun off to Janney largely. They discontinued those services. The chemical dependency, which is the Juneau Recovery Hospital, which became Rainforest Recovery Center, was transferred to CBJ. In 99, it lost $1 million. The last full year that Bartlett operated Juneau Recovery Hospital had $1 million loss. Now it was 25 years ago. Now, in the history of the program, prior to 99, the CBJ had funded that through various taxes. Nobody ever expected Juneau Recovery Hospital. These programs have never been self-sustaining through the actual revenues for providing service. For a public health type service like this, which is exceedingly important in Juneau, and the board is, to a person is, very committed to the program, you're going to have another source of funding to make these things work. And from the time that it was transferred, which started in 2000, culminated in 2003, and then forward, the program enjoyed some pretty strong support. If we still had that level that you see in 2019, we probably wouldn't be talking about Rainforest Recovery Center now. Any entity, whether this is operated by Bartlett or operated again by CBJ or operated by a third party, any entity is going to require some sort of subsidization for this thing to happen. So part of the message that we want to make sure it's conveyed to the community through this is that we're not expecting something different to happen in the future. It's going to require a subsidy if that's the decision the community wants to make, which is to continue this program.
Thank you, Max.
So the next program we're going to talk about are two programs, Home Health and Hospice. These are both new programs that we took over with when Traffic Community Services moved to close the programs in October of 22. So when we look at Home Health, it had a budget of $424,000 in direct revenues in 25 on $1.36 million in direct expenses. Well, an operating margin of $934,000. We look at overhead allocations through the cost report. We had $466,000 in additional costs allocated. You'll see the zero to our facilities allocation because both of these programs are in rented space outside the off campus at this point, so there would be no facilities allocation through the cost report. And so with that first one, Home Health, we have an allocated operating loss of $1.4 million. When in the hospital program, they had direct revenues budgeted at $504,000. Is it done? Okay. It's more of a ABC with this one. I'll try to talk louder, sorry. The microphone's dying. So with a budget of $504,000 in FY25 for hospice on direct expenses of $951,000, it has an operating loss of $448,000. For hospice, we had an allocated overhead of $325,000 with an allocated operating loss of $813,000. When we looked at the options matrix for these two programs, they had the same options as RRC, which is to subsidize, close the program, or change of ownership. When we look at home health services, it was a service that was taken over by Bartlett when the Catholic Community Services moved the closed program in October of 22. Up to these notes. So the home health was developed in conjunction with the hospice program, and that was predominantly due to staffing two programs. So in order to cover the call between the two programs, they had to share their staffing between the two programs. Catholic Community Service did have a lower wage and benefit threshold than Bartlett. So when we brought them into our pay structure and our benefit structure, we increased costs at that point for both programs, while we maintained the same basic revenue structure that was existed before. When I look at current condition, home health has expended approximately $470,000 during the 9 months of operations. It is budgeted to lose approximately $930,000 in FY25, its first full year of operations. We've had a lack of consistently available physical rehab services that has challenged the program and staff. We also had the director of the program recently resign. The position was combined with, is it better? Combined with the hospital director duties. With this program, we haven't even started billing yet, so the revenue numbers are based on estimates on Medicare reimbursement at this point. Home health and hospice share a lease space costing $2,600 a month, and that's why we didn't have that facilities allocation on the prior slide. The data mix for this program is 10% Medicaid, 79% Medicare, 9% private, and 1% VA. So BRH has held initial discussions with a private home health and hospice entity with interest in operating these programs. A performance was completed for both programs. Some of the underlying assumptions in them didn't come to fruition, so we ended up with patient volume variances on both programs.
There you go. Rebecca.
When we look at the pro forma versus actually what's going on, for home health, we had an assumed census of 20, and we're actually running at 25. And for hospice, it was an ADC of 25, and we're closer to 10 at this point. The other thing that's kind of affecting the program is length of stay. Our hospice program was running at 28 days length of stay. It has moved up to closer to 47 days as of today. But nationally, the hospice programs run a census or an average length of stay closer to 90-some days. And so our program's running a slightly lower census than nationally. Through March of 2024, wage expenses exceed gross revenue by $55,000. Direct payroll costs exceeding net revenue can be challenged to be fixed as stated before. The program is tending in the right direction. However, with costs holding steady, revenues steadily increasing month over month. Staffing levels are currently shared with hospice patients, I stated before, but we are struggling with the therapy side and getting patients seen by therapy in a timely manner. Volumes have been constrained due to staffing challenges at this point. The proposed recommendation for this program is the board understands the importance of this program to the community and will work to ensure that services are retained in the community. Management will pursue transfer of operations to a third-party provider. If this is not successful, the board and management will pursue permanent subsidization. The next program we're going to look at is hospice, and it has the same basic underlying history and background as a home health program. It was taken over when Catholic Community Services moved to close in October of 22. We are a shared staffing model. It has the same wage and cost issue as the home health agency. So when you bring it into Bartlett and into PERS, our benefits are significantly more costly than what was ran at Catholic Community Services. Hospice has expended approximately $510,000 during its first 9 months of operation, and it's budgeted to lose approximately $450,000 in FY25. The growth and sustainability of hospice programs are largely dependent on healthy referral patterns for PCP and average length of stay closer to the 90-day mark. The director of this program actually took on oversight of the Associated Home Health Program, which has helped us bring costs down slightly between the two programs. They do share at least space, as stated before, and all of the patients are in the CBJ area. As we stated before, we have held initial discussions with the private home health and hospice entity to gain their interest on this program. The pro forma analysis is kind of the same as the home health one, so I'm not going to go back over that section of the slide. Through March of 2024, wage and benefit expenses exceed gross revenue by $140,000. Staffing levels are currently at minimum levels and are shared with home health patients. There were some donations started to be gathered to help support this program of approximately $200,000 from various different donors. It has the same proposed recommendation as home health in that the board understands the importance of this program to the community and will work to ensure that services are retained in the community. Management will pursue transfer of operations to a third-party provider. If this is not successful, the board and management will pursue permanent subsidization. The next program we're going to talk about is the Crisis Center. This is a new program to Bartlett. It opened in December of 2023. And so the slide we have up here is slightly different than other ones, and that's based on an estimate. So when we completed the budget for this program, it was based on pro forma data that ended up not coming to fruition. So we have come up with an estimate based on the first couple of months of operation. In that estimate, we have $960,000 in direct revenue, on $3.1 million on direct expenses. That leaves us an operating loss of $2.2 million on the program. Overhead allocations are based on estimates of other programs of like size on our cost report. That would be $1.25 million in overhead allocation, $2 million in facilities allocation. That's based on it being a new building and square footage for the program, leaving an allocated operating loss of $3.75 million for the Crisis Center program. On the options matrix, it has the two same options as other programs, which are to subsidize, close, or change of ownership. As I stated, the Crisis Center opened in December of 2023. It was slated to open in March of 2023, but due to delays in construction, it was pushed back to later in the year. It was initially conceptualized as an adult and adolescent program, providing both observation and residential programs. When the building was finally completed, the program ended up just being adolescents due to the design of the building. When we look at the current conditions, we've had 37 encounters of adolescents since opening in December of 2023, with 24 unique patients coming through the program. It is currently expected to lose $1.1 million in FY24 based on the first 6.5 months of operation. It is expected to lose the $2.2 million for FY25, its first full year of operations. It is paid on a fee-for-service demonstration program, so it is a waiver program to the Medicaid program. When we looked at the pro forma side of things, when they started looking at the program, the volumes of the program didn't meet what the pro forma had in it. So you can see up there when we look at the 2024 pro forma Medicaid revenue, it's well above what we have as an estimate. And that was predominantly due to the way the pro forma was built. It was built using national data on utilization, and then it was increased by 140% to our geographic region and our isolation. The volumes of pro forma have never come to fruition. That's why we see the large decrease in the estimate based on compared to the pro forma. We do have several sections of data up there. We have the FY24 pro forma, which is a 1 year's pro forma data. And so when we look at the pro forma, this is the pro forma based on the adolescent program excluding adults. And so with just the adolescents, the pro forma showed that the program would have lost $577,000, excluding overhead allocations. This is just direct costs. When we look at FY24 estimate, that's the numbers I provided you earlier. This is our estimate on how we'll end this year based on the first couple of months of operations. And that's a loss of a little over $1 million. And we have our FY2025 pro forma, which is based on the data, as I said before, and it showed a loss of $582,000. With our FY25 estimate, showing the $2.2 million loss in the second column from the right. This program has the same wage and benefit issues as before, and that wages and benefit exceed net revenue by $2 million. So it's a hard problem to fix. Staffing levels are currently at minimum. With this program starting up in December, it was predominantly staffed with contract staff. And as we start having these discussions, there continues to be 95% contract staff in this program. One thing I didn't note in the current condition is the base staffing that we're currently running covers 2 of the observation beds and 4 of the residential beds at any given time. So that's the patients we can care for today if someone walked in. If we wanted to go to full capacity, additional staffing and expenses would be required to move up to that. Move to the 2 observation patients and the 7 residential patients. So when I move to the proposed recommendation from the board, it is a program closure and space utilization plan developed for Aurora building. This program could be retained if the CBJ chose to provide a permanent subsidy. This is a difficult financial recommendation and is no way a reflection of the individuals who provide and receive these services. The last program we're going to talk about today is the ABA program. You'll see up there that the estimate they are all zeros at this program, and I'll go over that. So ABA stands for Applied Behavioral Analysis, and it is a program that cares for autistic children in the autistic spectrum from ages 2 to 21. It is a program that Bartlett stood up in 2021. It was previously done as a contract to the Juneau School District before it came over to Bartlett. So as we started having these discussions, the two service providers in the program, based on the uncertainty of the program, put in their resignations. So effectively, they closed the program effective June 13th, 2024 with their resignations. Then impacted program staff and families currently receiving services have been notified. These 2 staff intend to provide ABA therapy through private services, which we've already reached out and tried to provide as much support as we can, and as they endeavor to keep that program alive. So the proposed recommendation is to support departing staff and the startup of a new ABA program through private practice. It's always, we'll talk about next steps, you just keep turning on. And so what we have up here is next step, the timeline we've kind of gone over before, the dates that we indicated before. What's different on this slide is the submit written public comment. So we will be taking public comment through June 19th, 2024. Comments can be submitted electronically to bartletthospital.org sustainability, or by mail to BRH Board of Directors at 3260 Hospital Drive. All comments received during this window will be compiled and included in the public packet for the June 24th Finance Committee and June 25th Board Committee meetings.
Hey, Joe, for your slide presentation. So now we're going to begin the question and answer period. And I'll do it back and forth from online to what's in the room, and we'll start with online. So if someone online, just raise your hand and I can call on you and you'll unmute yourself. Right, I don't see anybody raising their hand online, so Kelly said she could hear me. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start here. Please state your name and ask your question.
What the other impacts were? Staff review. I heard that, but you mentioned that you're hearing about other impacts from staff. Just wondered if you could go into that a little bit more.
Thank you. Joe or Ian? Kim.
So yeah, thank you, Rebecca, for that question. So Joe mentioned the impacts from the ED. We know that there'll be an impact from there, but we also, and I think you're alluding to the point that you guys are 3.5 facility or ASAM.
It was just, we heard perspective from one person that works in the ED. So just wondering if you're hearing from other staff about what that might look like.
I think the majority of what we're hearing is from that kind of same echoing as where will the patients go if RRC is not there? Along with that, it's a 3.5 ASAM facility. And so, frequently when they graduate from that facility, as you know, they go to 3.1. And that's kind of a necessary step for them to take. And where will they go? And, if there's not one here, then that's going to push them perhaps outside of the community, away from families and support to find a 3.1.
So I'm going to ask you guys, when you ask a question, if you can come up to the front of the room so they can hear you online too. So do that. Next question in the room. I don't see him. Come on right up to the front here. State your name and then your question.
Hi, my name is Aaron Sermo. I know that Bartlett received a lot of money to build the new behavioral health building and to implement crisis services. I know that's like in the millions from the trust. Will Bartlett be on the hook to pay that back if those services no longer exist?
Joe?
So you're talking about funding for the behavioral, ABA, or for the rural buildings.
The Aurora building and the crisis stabilization services.
So we reviewed every donation and every grant and every bond used to fund that building. We've been in discussions with the mental health trust as to the current situation that we're in. There was no indication that we'd be on the hook for those funds.
However, we do have to pay back the bonds. There are bonds that we have to continue funding. But right now, that program doesn't provide enough cash to even pay for the bonds. So we bonds, so you got to take it out of the hospital.
Thank you. Next question, come on up. Go ahead, sir.
Hello, my name is Luke McCarthy-Jones. My primary question is, obviously, the building that has the Rainforest Recovery Center has been around for a long time, and it will remain if the program closes. My question I'd like to understand is, of these allocated overhead and facility costs, how would those be affected if Rainforest closed? For example, like some descriptions made earlier about like a portion of the cost of the CEO that applies to Rainforest, just to give an easy example. Obviously, those costs will remain. So what's the difference between costs that apply because we're in operations and costs that would actually go away if our operations ceased?
That's Joe.
So that's a good question. Thank you for the question. It's a difficult one to answer because the way we allocated funds are based on a cost report, and then it's various methods, obviously. Some of the ones that obviously go away is we don't have EBS staff over there cleaning the building. There is some facility stuff that would go away. So there's part of those funds would go away, part of those costs, not all of them. You are correct in stating that. But the ones that wouldn't be allocated to them in the future that would go back to the hospital as costs that would maintain would be paid under cost-based reimbursement through Medicare. So when you move funds out of the hospital, it decreases the amount of revenue the hospital has from Medicare directly. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach, and we have to look at it from two different directions to really understand it. So your question is a little bit more complicated than I think you're intending it to be.
Yeah, I think to add to that, assume that the building stays foul. What we try and do is find something to put in there that would be revenue producing, to be able to absorb the costs, overhead costs that could not be actually reduced.
Thank you.
Great question.
My name is Roman Motika. I've been a hospice volunteer for a number of years. That's my perspective. So I have a couple of questions. We went through a lot of information. It was really hard to absorb it all, but I'm glad you have this packet here. So when Catholic Community Services let go of hospice, there was a lapse in hospice being present in Juneau for several months because they had to go through an accreditation process. So one question is, if you're going to go to another party, are we going to see this lapse? And who that third party is going to be? The other question is, I think part of this is a matter of educating the public what hospice and hospice home health care provides to help increase the awareness in the community that these options are available to them.
Thank you. I'm gonna let Nick start with this one.
First of all, thanks for being a long-term hospice volunteer. I know there's been a deep core of people who have volunteered for hospice for many years, going back to before CCS had it, when it was Hospice and Home Care of Juneau, and the thing was formed in the 1980s. I know many of the board members personally. It was one of my clients. Richie Sonner was the director back then, and it hit a very hard wall, primarily when they started restricting funding through the Medicare program. When they went to incidence-based billing, and there was a lot of things that really upended it. And I've always been a believer that you got to, for a hospice program, and I think it's kind of the position of the hospital, is that it needs to be a long-term commitment, that you can't have this uncertainty that comes out of, especially in hospice, because there's, you have volunteers, number one, but you also have donors that are a big part of the funding mix for providing a program like that. And so when when CCS, and I just recently got on the board when CCS came to the board and said, we're not going to do this anymore and you guys need to do it. And we were kind of like, okay, we're going to take this on and we're going to do it. And that created a ton of uncertainty in the community. There's no question about it, a ton of uncertainty around what hospice was going to look like. And it greatly impacted also the funders. And so our goal is a long-term view on hospice. And, is it better being operated by a third party, or is it better being operated by Bartlett? It's an open question, but one thing that's certain is we need to make sure that there's a long-term commitment to the program so that we can, in part, reestablish that both the donor base and also the funder base. And I'm hopeful that program can get it back on its feet. I know that Juneau Community Foundation has expressed some interest. There's the old Verna Kerrigan money that they still have at Juneau at JCF, and we don't take this. The numbers and the words on the page don't really underline the fact that there's a commitment to that program that we're going to watch out for. So.
Thank you, guys.
I'm Reverend Karen Perkins, and first I want to say thank you all, because I'm sure you all worked very hard at trying to figure this stuff out, and I appreciate what you said about your commitment to the services, and I believe everybody's committed to the service, but I'm trying to understand and figure out some stuff. So one is what it says, the program closure, we're back on Rainforest Recovery. Program closure would have minimal impact on emergency department utilization per ED physician leader. Is there like a data basis for that or anything? I'm not trying to be insulting to that physician leader. It's counterintuitive to me and certainly different from my personal experience. And so I just kind of want to know, where did they come from?
Thank you very much for the question. Ken, and I think maybe Dr. Jones might want to say something here.
Thank you, great question. So like I said before, we are looking at all the impact for all these programs, not just for this one, and we do know that there'll be an impact. We don't know what that impact's going to look like, and we can say that because the program is still ongoing. We did see, and it's hard because the program was closed like 2020, 2021 and 22 due to COVID, because we turned that into an alternative care site. And we don't really have data from that impact either, because when COVID hit, we saw volumes drop overall. So that's one of the reasons why we're, having communications with some partners and others in the state to try to see if anybody's willing or able to help us try to bridge that gap as we're moving through this process.
Thank you. Dr. Jones?
So I've been grappling with this a lot. And
I don't know the impact on ER. I think that there's numbers that I want to get to look at that a little more carefully. But when I think about rainforest, I think about the people that are the stakeholders here. So one is the hospital. You know, we have a commitment to provide quality patient-centered care. Part of that is addiction services. Two, the other stakeholder is our community. And one thing that makes me proud of being part of this community is that we take care of our people. We take care of our vulnerable people. And people suffering from addiction are really vulnerable people. And I really hope we can continue to provide that services to give people a chance for recovery. And the third entity that I want to point out is search. Search, 50% of the people are search beneficiaries. And the way that we get money to provide those services is not from search, it's from Medicaid. And we know we lose money from Medicaid. And for the health and well-being of their members, it's important that they be part of this discussion on how do we make this work? Because it's needed, and we need to take care of these people. And so thanks, and that's where I'm at. And this is really hard. I really hope we can figure this out.
Thank you, Dr. Jones.
Thank you. Yeah, because I'm coming from a place of providing service to some of the most vulnerable in Juneau, and real commitment to try to do that. And I see every day what happens when services are cut, and they're being cut in a lot of different ways in a lot of different places. And I know the mix gets shifted out to gets shifted. So I had another question though. Was so when you said that there was a state mandate that or no, there was a mandate that states be reimbursed. I don't know which page I wrote this on. Oh yeah. There was a mandate that what was it, Medicare, Medicaid reimbursed at 100%, but then they got a lot of waivers passed. So, and I am not expecting the hospital board to solve this problem. I'm really not, but it seems like, okay, so who needs to be lobbying home to say, well, if that's, obviously that's going to be, making it difficult for people to survive, for hospitals to survive, for the services to be provided, for people to be able to enter into services that they need to find the least expensive way to provide the services that people need. Maybe you can't answer that. I don't know.
Can you just clarify your question? I'm not really 100% about the question.
I can actually, take a shot at this background. In 1966, when the Medicare program was started, so was the Medicaid program, and both were required to pay cost. Medicare still pays cost, even though it has different ways of paying, but it's close to cost. The states in the 80s started all getting waivers because the state budgets cannot afford cost of care. So while they keep giving benefits away, their ability to reimbursement. Now, keep in mind, Medicaid is a federally matched program. So everything they pay out, if they pay out $1, Medicare or the federal government pays 50 cents of it, and the state pays 50 cents of it. The American Hospital Association, the physicians, the American Medical Associations for 30 plus years have been griping about this, as well as the insurance companies, because it cost shifts the care. But if you're in Gary, Indiana, where I'm from Indiana, if you're in Gary, Indiana, you're 90% Medicaid and you're going out of business. So there are some reimbursements for what they call safety net hospitals, and that's one of them. Cook County, everyone has known about Cook County. But in a small community like ours, where we're not big enough to get those things, that payer mix really does make a difference. And so we've been that the industry has been advocating for this for years and we've gotten nowhere. And it's not only bad on the hospital side, but the physician reimbursement has not increased one whit for years.
And then the other question I have is, so income's going up in Juneau, at least the latest numbers that I was able to find, is going up in Juneau. And not by huge amounts, but it's certainly going up. And as our housing costs or whatever, but still disposable income is going up in Juneau. And again, this is way beyond a hospital board question. I realize that, but I also am trying to figure out this has got to get supported somewhere, because people that I love are being abandoned. And so where's the money going? And how come the hospital isn't being, if the hospital is a city-run business, how come the hospital isn't getting supported more by the city? Do we know, or is that a silly question?
That's an assembly question.
Okay. I just, yeah. Okay.
We have the chart. You have the voice.
But the hospital was set up to be an enterprise. So the city expects, if you take away all these other things, they expect us to be able to have sufficient enough income to replenish our asset base. That's what that is. What's happened over time is all these other programs have come in and then support has dropped for some of them. And I have not been here. I don't know where that support was reallocated to. But that's an assembly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question in the chat. The question goes, I think the hospice and home care slide said that Alaska ranks 48 out of 50 in hospice and health or home care utilization. Do you know why our utilization is so low in the state? And is it higher in Juneau versus statewide?
I do know. I'm quickly Peterson. I'm the medical director of hospice and home healthcare. I'm going to comment on that later. I mean, we're a new program, so we're just growing. But there are several smart people who said earlier it's about education. And we started with the medical staff. 50% of doctors in the United States of America do not ever bring up hospice, even when people are declining rapidly. So we have to educate physicians. And to that end, we did a presentation to the medical staff in December, after which we had a little bit of an uptick. We are planning to go around to meet all of them at their meetings at Valley and Southeast, have lunch with them, bring them pizza, just to engage them. Like, what do you need from us to make this work better? We also are going to do a public relations campaign with KNY and K2 so that we can basically educate the public. Ask your doctor. If you can ask your doctor in the ER if he or she washed their hands, then you should be able to ask your doctor about, like, where am I in my illness? So what we challenged the doctors with in December was, when you've got someone who's got congestive heart failure or COPD and they're not going to get better, and it's slowly getting worse, you need to have a difficult conversation now, not in 6 months, because that's when they come into hospice later. So if we do that, we can do better. Our days, as Joe pointed out, have already gone from 27 to 47. And the early numbers were skewed by the fact that people were waiting in August for us to open. And we had a lot of pressure on us to get open. And so that will happen. And I will say one more thing, and I won't say it in my comments later. Hospital-based hospice programs have been shown elsewhere to make money, okay? But you've got to have a year of good numbers. We haven't collected a penny yet. So, I mean,
Dr. Peterson, I would only add to help the conversations is that the federal government is the one that has decided how to reimburse hospice.
Exactly.
And it tends to reimburse for longer stays and shorter stays. So think about Jimmy Carter, President Carter, and Rosalind. Jimmy Carter's been in hospice for over a year now, still alive. Rosalind came in and died within a week. So if you look at those two contracts just in one family, the reimbursement for that hospice was completely different. So the sooner we get patients in that are eligible, the more sustainable a program like this is. But it takes not only the docs, but the community accept that. That there's certain things that they can't.
Right, so I'll add one more thing. So that's the education piece, because some people think hospice is giving up. What we say, hospice is giving up on aggressive therapy that doesn't work. So let's go home and be with your family, live 3 weeks longer, have better pain control and less expenses. I mean, and more help in the house. I mean, it's a no-brainer, but people have to know that. That's really the message that we know that we need to get out there, and that's our goal in this next year. So,
I just want to say thanks to Dr. Peterson for answering our question.
I'm sorry, I'm passionate about it.
No, I know you are.
Question.
Oh, it's a comment.
Okay, we're gonna do comments in a few
Oh,
minutes.
question.
Okay.
I was a recipient, I'm a veteran, military.
What's your name, sir?
Alden, Ballalong.
Yeah, what part of town are you from?
I'm in Juneau, I live up Simpson, 2945 Simpson Avenue. Yeah, I'm from Hawaii. I appreciate here. I got transferred from regular army. And I'm a recovering alcoholic. And I'm happy because Juneau took care with the VA and rainforest recovery. I did some therapy with Surge. It's just that there's a lot of places you gotta go and all that. And I've been a recipient of rainforest years ago, and they were like one-on-one therapy. They understood where I was coming from, especially the other residents. And now these things are going on. The economy, the staffing, the traveling nurses. My wife is she works at Wildflower Court. And traveling nurses are paid a lot of bucks. Yeah. A lot of money. And they could have concentrated on the nurses of Wildflower Court locally, so they can, instead of spending outside travelers, they can concentrate on the local nurses and all that. My question is that we're talking about third parties. Have you found any third parties yet?
Very good question.
So we have, I'm not at liberty to say because we're starting the conversation, but since we met with the assembly and the board jointly, we've had quite a few emails come to us with people reaching out throughout Alaska, wanting to offer some feedback and try to find some solutions. So we'll have those meetings set up. I just sent out those emails today to be set up for an appointment for Joe and I, or a meeting for Joe and I to meet with them and hopefully gain some insight and maybe some hope for the future of this program. So more to come on that.
The reason why I asked Dano is because I'm a veteran and I talked to Malden and all people, and they were saying they heard that rainforest was going to hopefully no. But they said because there is a lot of veterans here in Juneau, and so far doing my counseling for almost 12 years, 9 of them had overdosed or either committed suicide and all that. I know it's hard for like hospitals or therapy. They couldn't convey how a veteran feels. And it's hard for Juneau to intake veterans and things like that. So you have to send them either Walla Walla or you have to send them to Anchorage. But for those who cannot even travel, they're here. They're kind of suffering right now. And I know. So hopefully third parties can be military, hopefully. Coincide with Bartlett. Because when I do MRT, I teach MRT at JAMI and also at the domiciliary and all that. And some lapse, some relapse, and some binge. But they come in the next day and they're honest. They did it because of psychological problems. But hopefully third parties can recognize emotional feelings or some type of
grant or something, not only for veterans, but for those who cannot afford. None of that. So that was.
Thank you very much for sharing your story and congratulations on your sobriety. Want to say anything else? Ben?
I would just add that we've not only opened these conversations to the public as well as the assembly, but we've been in contact with the office of our two senators to make sure that they understand some of the issues. We've been meeting with other organizations that might have similar services, see whether or not we can lower our costs by using some of those. But what we're really trying to do is figure out if there's ways that we can solve this problem by reaching out to others. We're still in that process, as Kim mentioned, but there's a lot of interest. But we had to get to this point of saying, what do we do when these organizations lose so much money that they're putting your hospital in jeopardy? And now we're starting to get some feedback of how we might improve or, some decision whether or not they want to subsidize. So we're reaching out. The state health department too. Just
Thank you, CEO. Thank you, panel.
Thank you. She's gonna come up next and then I'll have you come up.
In case you couldn't hear my name before, I'm Rebecca Mills. So I'm a numbers girl, so I'm just wanting some more information. Is there evidence reflected in the packets from previously published revenue reports in the Bartlett board meetings that would support today's edition of the breakdown of overhead and facilities costs allocated to the programs listed? And if not, would that information be publicly shared to help with problem solving and decision making?
So those came from our Medicare cost report. So that is the document that can be shared if you want to.
Yeah, just to see how it's allocated between the different programs.
Just so everyone knows, is that since 1966, the federal government has had a cost report. Think of it as a tax document that allocates cost, all the administrative overhead costs, all the programs, the other entities. So when Joe's talking about use that to allocate cost, that's a well-known document. It's publicly available, and that's the best basis unless you're going to do absolute line item costing.
Okay, that would be the same for facilities as well? Or is that different, how that process?
It's part of the allocation.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Next.
Well, I just wanted to add about the cost report that they are required by reg. So when you're preparing a cost report, our cost report's not different from other facilities. It's very standardized. And that breakout that we did, part of the reason we have it broken out between the administrative allocation and the facility allocation is that some of the facilities costs are specifically related to that program. When you look at utilities, for example, that's specifically related to the building, whereas the administrative is more, covers the entire, operation of the hospital. So, some of those costs, we're doing that to identify what a number would need to be reimbursed if we're going to continue to be subsidized by the city and borough, to operate that program. That's what we're after. We're not looking for a big number or small number, just the right number to make sure we can communicate that to, the CPJ or the state if we want to continue those programs.
So RRC is just much more expensive to run than the other programs?
Yeah, there's been recent remodels that were done down there. There's, it's a square footage, it's a large square footage. The footprint is large. There's reasons for that. I asked the exact same question to Joe just a couple of days ago. So there's a reason why it's as high as it is. Yeah.
Thank you.
Please state your name and what part of town you're from.
My name is Justine Munch, and I'm a Juneau resident since 1978. I've been an employee of Bartlett as a nurse for many, many years, now retired, thank you all. I'm also a recipient of healthcare at Bartlett. I've received several surgeries, lots of colonoscopies, and I'm currently receiving infusion therapy and chemotherapy for cancer. which I have done multiple times as well. So very familiar with the hospital services. A lot of discussion has been on the outpatient services. What my question is, what are the initiatives and discussions regarding increasing hospital revenue? Not outpatient revenue in particular, but could be outpatient, but hospital revenue, increasing surgical services. What are those discussions?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that because we are looking at that. I think the first thing to know is that unlike many other communities, a lot of people leave this community for healthcare. And in fact, both the state and the city incentivize people to leave this community. So that actually undercuts our abilities. Right? So just keep that in mind. Number two, when you look at a place like Juneau with about 30 to 35,000 folks, the question is what sort of specialty can you get up here? So cardiovascular is hard, neuro would be hard, but there are some opportunities. The first one is because we have a Da Vinci robot, we can do a lot more surgeries in the cancer, especially in women's services. And we have two physicians that fly in, Dr. Hope and Dr. Hurst, that fly in 2 days a month to do clinic and surgeries. What's interesting about the cancers here, that I've worked all over the United States. There's different cancers wherever you go. The cancers here fairly similar, but people present much later in their cancer, discovered later, and that's a lot of times because of the remoteness of the community. So we believe that we can grow a lot in the services in that area. The other area that we used to do more of is orthopedics. And we believe that we can grow in that area if we can provide a price that includes both the implantable, the hospital, and the physician at a level that is less than what people are going out and getting. Go down to Seattle, you have these specialty centers, and I think Anchorage, that they don't have to cover the cost of ED. They don't have to cover the cost of anything else. They just do those surgeries. And so they're very low cost entities that people will fly out. We've seen people getting surgeries in Arizona that live here in Seattle and so forth and so on. So we're trying to figure out a way to bring those back. And we first have to start with the right type and the right number of physicians. We're in some discussions with an independent physician group out of Anchorage, thanks, as well as we're looking to hire an independent, a physician that does hips and knees. If I have a physician who's an employee, I can then set my rates better. So we're looking at those two. The other thing that we're looking at is we've upgraded our diagnostic imaging so we can do more cardiovascular diagnostics. That doesn't mean we can do that doesn't mean we can fix things, but we can do a lot more diagnostics. With our PAC system, we can actually send those diagnostics out to anyone, see them. So we're looking to grow in those three areas: orthopedics, women's services, and diagnostic imaging. Kim is working with ORs to be able to look at the types of procedures we can hold on there. Our ORs are kind of old, and orthopedic suites, you usually can't do it anymore, but they usually be set up for work. Now you can do two. But most physicians want back-to-back surgical suites. Now, surgical suites are much bigger now because of the equipment than they used to be. So we only have one of those suites. We're also doing eyes and is it conscious sedation for dental procedures. We need to figure out how to move those out so we have more capacity in the ORs. And then we're looking at the Da Vinci robot in terms of what is common to do that. It's typically urology. It's basically labor and delivery first, urology second, cardiovascular third. But there's other things like hernias. And so Kim and others are looking at, okay, what can we do to be able to increase the load there? But if we can't solve send our employees of the state and city and others out, our growth will be limited. And so that's the other problem that's there.
So are you having discussions with the city about that?
Of course we are. You know, you have to keep in mind, cities are just like any other entity. They are self-insured for their medical benefits. And as the medical costs go up, aging of population means medical costs go up when you get the cardiovascular, the cancer, and then also diabetes, you know, and joints. You're raising the cost of care. And so they have to manage that. That's why I'm so interested in whether or not we could find a price that would be helpful to them. We're also looking at 340B program to lower the drug costs. So for example, if you have wet macular degeneration, I think the shots, just the drug is about $2,500 just for that. And so we're trying to figure out, can we put some of these high costly drugs in the 340B program just to lower the cost and help them out. We don't help the city with their total cost. It's going to be pretty hard for them not to want to send people out.
So my last question is, the search beneficiaries now, well, you don't have to be a search beneficiary to utilize search. So as a retiree, tier 1, I have the luxury of excellent health insurance as well as Medicare. So I could go to search to receive diagnostics. I haven't. So how does that impact those clients in general who do not receive care at Bartlett? They use AMC, they go to Sitka, they go north, or they go to a facility in Seattle. So what is being done to look at the population of people that are not coming to us who live here, who are insured, that choose to use search where search is not benefiting Bartlett?
Well, that's a very difficult question because, again, I would preface this. This is a small town. You don't have the ability to have 2 of everything and still survive.
However, they have a CT and an MRI,
Right.
so they are duplicating.
And they are in the process of maybe looking at a surgical center. They claim not to be subject to CON. That's not an easy playing field. They actually get much more per patient than we do. And so the amount of money that's coming in through Indian Health Services far exceeds. And when they get service from us, you either pay Medicaid or Medicare. So this whole community is, it's an unfair playing field. That happened with the Obamacare, the bill nobody read. It's a political issue. And if you want, I'll just step back a little bit. If you want a hospital to survive, that issue is going to have to be tackled.
Right.
If I could just add a little bit, Justine, it's a very difficult question. And it's one that we're looking at, you know, from a variety of fronts. And it is larger than just the hospital because we've been contacted by dentists, by other providers in town who all feel like they have a target on their back. And it is, search has, and I think uniquely in Alaska so far, has decided to compete directly against the private providers that are out there, including Bartlett, but also, you know, dentists and other providers. And when your reimbursement rate is significantly higher than what other providers get, it creates this very uneven field. There is, and one of the things we're looking at is what's the healthy outcome for Juneau from a medical, from a healthcare, overall kind of global healthcare environment from the macro level. And the lack of competition in any market has been studied in detail. And anytime you have a monopoly provider in any market, healthcare outcomes go down. And we are very much in danger of having a monopoly here. And a lot of what we're dealing with is because of that. And so it's a hard position we find ourselves in as Bartlett board members to be evaluating that, trying to figure out the best path forward. But it is something we're definitely very concerned about. And looking what our options are.
I would add that the most important thing to understand is its impact on the medical community. If you start losing the physicians, and some of the physicians are being bought out of their practices and moving, it doesn't really, it hurts the hospital, it hurts the whole healthcare. So as I've said to the assembly and others, it's a very fragile, small medical community. If you start pulling it apart, because you have these dislocations where a physician can't support themselves unless they work for that company, but they choose to leave, all of a sudden you are changing a very fragile medical ecosystem. And they're seeing it right now in the employees. They can't compete for, I think the example that was given is the dental hygienists. They can't compete because they don't have enough money where someone can offer a major sign-on bonus and maybe $1 or $2 more per hour.
I want to respond to your earlier question too, though, about what the hospital's doing. There's two things. Ian did a great job covering a lot of bases. There was two, what I think are very important things that I want to make sure that the folks here, and Joe's going to talk about one and Kim is going to talk about the other. First is critical access. So we're pursuing potential conversion to critical access for the hospital and have looked at that in detail and and I want Joe to share more about that. We've also been dealing with the effects of COVID still. When we converted from, pre-COVID, when we went into the COVID model, mental health and certainly BOPs were, affected in a huge way. Inpatient mental health was just eviscerated in a lot of respects. We went from, 10 or 11 ADC in our 12 patient MHU unit down to 2. And so if you guys could just talk a little bit about what, critical access on a very high level, and then, what we've been doing to try to improve ADC and mental health, because those are high reimbursement.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. So the things we've been trying to do for inpatient mental health unit is really set a goal of having at least an average daily census of 10. They've really done really well on that. Of course, that all depends on referral patterns and packets coming in. So they do review packets every day that come in with their medical director, and they accept patients as they have room. So they've done really good at keeping. I think when I looked yesterday, that we had 13 up at our mental health unit. And so that's actually been very helpful, and they've been able to maintain 10, with the exception of a couple of days, they dropped down to 8 or 9, but then they seem to come right back up.
So what Max was referring to is critical access hospital status. It's a payment designation for Medicare. And so right now, our Bartlett Hospital is in the demonstration program where we get cost-based reimbursement on the inpatient unit, which is more, it equates to quite a bit, Medicare only, quite a bit better reimbursement for Medicare in the inpatient unit. Going to a critical access hospital would take that cost base and spread it across inpatient and outpatient services, with the exclusion of some services where Medicare doesn't pay cost base. So clinics aren't included in that. RRC program would have been covered in that. Crisis would have been covered in that payment designation. We are going through initial steps trying to assess that program, and we hope to take it back to the board here in July some point.
Thank you, Joe. Ian, did you have a question? Yeah.
No, actually, Dr. Peterson addressed. I'm retired nurse from hospice and home care, and I have a lot of questions about what he. So my concern was, it's Leslie Chandler Holtzman, and I was an RN with hospice and home care for 5 years under CCS. And so the census issue is an issue. If you can't keep your census up, you don't have a program. And we put a lot of effort, volunteers and staff, in outreach. The misunderstanding people have about hospice is horrendous. It's saying I'm going to die. You know, we all are going to die. There's a better way of. So my concern is looking at what you have for a census and it not being sustainable. I know ours would drop down because we had stopped focusing on education and encouraging. And so that was my question. Is there an active program with professionals going in and speaking person to person with the physicians and in different groups, which apparently there is. But it was a huge effort on my part. And it was no lunches and going into the offices and seeing if they got lunch so that we could present. And the subject of patients came up and people were, the referrals came following that. I mean, were there statistics about that? No, but we saw it to the point where we're having a hard time covering our patients. But the community was being serviced. And as that program kind of subsided, so did that outreach. And then you have this, the thread got lost when CCS closed and dropped it, and the community tried to do the best they can. And so that education has to have gotten lost. And this, and somebody already said, the hospital-based home care and hospice can be profitable, but it takes effort and energy. And I have been all for Bartlett taking this over for many years because my question was about the census. I think that was answered, but I just have to say, do not give up on this thing. And not having done it for a year, and I know your staffing is difficult, but the reward in this community is immeasurable.
Yeah, the board is very committed to this program, to finding solutions. All of us are very committed to this. Thank you very much. We've been going a little over an hour and a half right now. I saw one more question and then we're going to take a break.
Good pleasure. Again, my name is Luke McCarthy-Jones. One question I have regards to just a general curiosity. I want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding. Critical access hospital is a phrase that's been brought up a few times, and I've looked that up out of my own interest. Both the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services and the State of Alaska Department of Health have a webpage titled Critical Access Hospitals. And to quote verbatim from the State of Alaska website, it references maintaining no more than 25 inpatient beds. Is this a different type of critical access hospital that I'm not looking for, looking on place? What does that 25 inpatient beds mean with respect to our current hospital capacity?
Yeah. What they're referring to is 25 acute beds. So our hospital, we have two different designations for beds. You have observation beds which are technically outpatients. You have our acute inpatient beds. And so the 25 is referring to the acute side. So the mental health is excluded from that as well. So we look at the beds in the OB, CCU, and then surge. And so when we looked at the last 2 years worth of data, we looked at every acute patient we had on a daily basis, analyzing this program. And then there's a handful of days in every year we actually exceeded that threshold. And so we're looking at how we manage patients as we look at that program as well. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. I have a follow-up then. Again, just broadening the scope of it. So is that to say that the nominal capacity of Bartlett would be capped at that lower number? And would that also affect our ability to respond to a local crisis, which Bartlett is?
Emergencies are separate. And so in emergency situations such as COVID, we're expanding beds. I don't know what we said. I don't remember that. 100 and something. Yeah, you can emergencies. That one is excluded completely. And so, I mean, on a given daily basis, we never hit that cap really.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I can explain it in
So-
more detail.
sure, but just to clarify, like on a busy week and with cruise ships, like our nominal capacity for inpatient would that be capped?
We would technically cap it in the 25. There are exceptions that we will work through those.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we're gonna take a break. It's 6 minutes after, we'll go till a quarter after 7, and we'll come back and that will begin our comment. All right, everybody, we're gonna, everybody get to see you. All right, so. Yes, everybody's just about that. So before we go into the comment section, do we have any questions, any more questions?
Hi, my name's Aaron Surma again. Joel mentioned that the Aurora Behavioral Health Building, one of the problems is that it was intended to serve adults and youth, and that's no longer possible for some kind of structural reason. We know what that structural reason is, how it came to be, and how much it costs to fix it.
Thanks for the question. It's a great question. So have you had an opportunity to tour that building? Okay, so as you kind of walk into the front door, there's two sides. You could go to this side, which is kind of where the Bartlett Outpatient Psychiatric Services kind of lives. And then the plan was to have this side to be part of crisis. Well, in order for us to be able to serve adults and adolescents at the same time, they were gonna have to be in the same space basically for a period of time. So if we had the adult crisis was planned to be on the first floor on the left-hand side of the building. And what that would mean is that when you brought in an adolescent to go upstairs, they'd have to go through the adult side or go through the outpatient side to get to the elevator. And so as we started looking at structurally, like how are we going to be able to do that? That was kind of a big thing, some concerns about, obviously you can't mix the adolescents and adults together in the same space. Making sure that, if we had adolescents that were in crisis, that were out of control, how do we manage the outpatients that are waiting in that side? So when we talk about structurally, how that made it difficult, that's what we're talking about is you're not able to completely separate the adolescents and the adults on the first floor.
How much would it cost to fix that?
Well, I don't really know, but that was a similar question kind of posed to me at the Assembly joint meeting. And, my answer was anything can be fixed if you have enough money. There's a lot of money that has already gone into that building. And just, thoughts if you, try to change that to that other side to kind of mirror. So you've got adults and adolescents on this side would require restructuring of, lights, fixtures, outlets, all of that, because you have to make it all safety for strangulation risk. I don't have a number, but it would be pretty significant.
Thank you.
Because that area currently is not set up that way.
Thank you very much. And you know the rules, state your name and where
I
you're
know
from.
the rules. My name is Carlin Conway, I'm a previous 32-year employee at Bartlett and previous surgical services director. And I guess it's more comment, maybe some questions, but just listening to everything that we've been talking about tonight, and I came here with the focus that it was just going to be talking about the outpatient services for recovery and various things, but I still come back to surgical services, and it is a huge mainstay of the hospital, obviously, and it's absolutely was my love for many years for Bartlett. But I look at Bartlett and I compare, I guess, being at Bartlett and doing services elsewhere, and a strike from the record with the press that I had a total knee replacement in Anchorage. And I did this because of the recovery services that were offered primarily. It's not because of the surgeon here or anything like that. But Bartlett generally needs to look at doing surgical services, doing what they do and do it well, not try to branch out too many places, do orthopedics, do endoscopy, and do it excellent. And the community needs that. If you could keep those patients here by having an endoscopy center, I'm not saying go build a fancy building, but do it right. Don't mix surgical services an endoscopy. Put endoscopy on the side, do it right, do it with IV conscious sedation, with anesthesia. Bring those patients here, make them feel like they're special every day, that it's a suite where you want to go and get your endoscopy and brag about it, but I had it done at Bartlett. And the same thing with orthopedics. If we can't keep orthopedic surgeons here, that is just a budget killer. There's no two ways about that. I'm not sure still how we go about that. That comes and goes. Ever since Dr. Schwarting left, obviously, it's been a pretty good decline because of the services that we offer. So I hate to see orthopedics decline at all. That's huge. But again, if Barton could do what they do and do it well and try not to do too many fancy things out there, it would be very helpful. I did have a question about contract services for RNs in particular. And were you saying that they were going to not have contract services from outside Alaska and only do contract services for nurses in Alaska? I'm not quite sure. Did I misunderstand
He
that?
was referring to contracts. He's more like service contracts. It wasn't contract services for.
I misunderstood that. I thought you were trying to say it. Well, that might be interesting, but and I guess just on the bandstand of search, I really, without saying too much, I look at that 50% patient load at Rainforest Recovery Center, and I just find that appalling. And I'd like to see how that could be changed for reimbursement, obviously. We all know that when there's a monopoly, there's not going to be much competition around, and I really don't want to see that in the community. So beef up services, make it attractive to the community. And they won't want to go out of here. They'll want to be there doing their endoscopy, their orthopedics, and that. I guess that's all I have to say unless you have a question for me.
I do have a question for you, Max. I just would like your take on, given your history, what impact do you think it would have on the hospital if Search opens their surgery center down the hill from here?
It will gut the hospital. I don't know what your stats are right now, and I don't need to know that. I know what they used to be for endoscopy and various surgical procedures and that, but it doesn't take much but common sense to know that if you lose endoscopy, that's going to be huge. As Donald Trump would say, very huge.
Let's not quote him.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal, and orthopedic services as well. It's not that all the others don't come in as well. I don't know enough about the Da Vinci program to speak anything towards that. I was actually quite surprised when they went through that. I think I understand a little bit better with women's services and cancer services and that. I just kind of, when I first heard about it, I kind of went, what are they talking about? And do they do it well? Are there people here that can do that, sustain that program?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brenda now. Miss Knapp, you got to tell us who you are and where you come from.
Yes, I'm just very unknown around here. Yeah, I'm Brenda Knapp from Juneau. And I'm here as a citizen tonight, a former board member though. And in fact, maybe if I can, I've been listening to people, back there, but maybe I'll turn sideways a little bit so people can just hear what I have to say a little better, not that it's so terribly important. But first of all, Juneau needs its community hospital. It needs it. I said that to the assembly when I stepped down off the board. We need that. We have a community board here. We have people from different professions, different parts of the community. They're on for different lengths of time, but they represent all of us. And any of you, anybody who is a resident of Juneau can apply to be on this board. And sometimes we need people to apply. We go lacking. So keep that in mind, because if you have, if we had all of our service monopolized, and I will say it by Search, but they have a board of beneficiaries, direct beneficiaries. It will not be anyone from the community. And we need this community hospital. It's ours. Now, in Juneau, there's a continuum of care, of medical services. The hospital is the most intensive end of that continuum. And it can't be responsible for everything. It has to do what it does best. And that gets back to the core services. You need emergency services. You need certainly med surge, you need the related lab capabilities and pharmacy. Somewhere in there, we didn't mention OB before, but we've got to have that too. But that's what we do best. Now, it might be possible for the hospital to incubate programs at some point if there's a real plan for moving them on, but not keeping them. It takes away from the core of the high-end services that a hospital is supposed to provide. So that brings me to something else. When this city incorporated, it chose to exercise health powers. Years ago, I worked for community and regional affairs too. I've had an eclectic career. But as I recall, there is some obligation, and I've mentioned this to a couple of people, it needs to be looked into. When a municipality decides to exercise health powers, I don't think it can fully divest itself of it. Now, the city used to have a health department, and one of those programs was mental health services. I was executive director of JAMI a number of years ago for 14 years. And while there, the city divested itself. We ended up with their mental health services. And I insisted on getting a maintenance of effort contribution from them every year, which we used to match state grant funds. And I think the city did that with some of the other programs, maybe all of them, as it reallocated them out in the community. When we were going through the pandemic, I know the assembly was upset that the hospital didn't seem to be doing enough that fell into the public health category. That there was a feeling that we needed to do more. Why weren't we stepping up, et cetera? And I brought that up at an assembly meeting that, well, you, the city, used to exercise, health powers. We had a health department here. That was given up. It used to do the kind of things now that you're wanting the hospital to do, but you haven't chosen to support that. So maybe there is still some obligation about that. Now that gets back into funding. The city always is worrying about funding sources. We certainly are expanding all of our tourism business. I don't know where the revenue to the city goes from that altogether. But, and I'm a taxpayer too. I own a home and I pay my property taxes. I don't like to see them go up. But I want this community hospital. I know many other people want it, and we need it. We really need it to have choice of health programs in this community. So we need to support it. We need to make sure the assembly understands that, and hopefully there'll be some looking into continuing obligations around maintenance of effort from the city. And also, they could reestablish a health department that could take on some of these other programs. They could fund them there and let the hospital do what it does best. I won't get into that, but let's keep the hospital. Let's support it and its core services and make sure the other needed services have a good home. Thank you. I've got to go.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Brenda, for staying so late. I know you had other obligations. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
that's great. Well, this is important to me.
Aaron.
Bye.
Aaron,
I'm going to stand where Brenda is. And
Aaron, just say your name.
Karen Locker, and I've been in Juneau for many, many, many moons. As a matter of fact, my first job with the city was to write the certificate of need that built the rehab hospital. That was my first job with the social services department. Brenda called it a health department, but it was actually the social services department that the city ran with a community board that provided these services and granted out to that. Then I moved to Search for 18 years. I can't comment as to what is happening at Search with regards to Juneau. I've been so far away from it. And then I went back to the state and finished up with the Certificate of Need program as the state administrator of the Certificate of Need program. So those are my perspectives. What I can agree with Brenda about is Juneau needs a community board, a community hospital with a community board. That is very important. I have traveled the state, I have traveled in other states, and you can see the difference with regards to health planning and services when you have a community hospital run by a community versus that of incomes somebody else, which is my comment with regards to looking at the information that we've been received. I'm very concerned about silos. And I mean, I know it wasn't planned, but when you look at what is visual on the paper, it's silos. And it can't be silos. It has to be circular for a continuum of care. We've seen the city run social service programs with community input. And then the city getting rid of the social services department and saying, okay, now fragmenting it out. When Bartlett brought Rainforest back in and was looking at the services with regards to the crisis center, et cetera, and so on, I was very excited about that because that's part of this circle versus silos. And I think that that's important. And when we look at the recommendations that are coming out of this, I think it still needs to be circular and not looking at a third party coming in. And I'm going to give a good example of what I noticed in my observations as traveling the state, looking at certificate and programs and everything. When you went into a community that did not have crisis services or really integrated mental health services, there were patients that stayed in emergency rooms for 30 to 45 days waiting for a bed. And most of them were adolescents waiting for a bed in the emergency room, receiving crisis care. I look at it, when I look at the silos, I see, yes, we take out this silo, but all we're gonna do is shift cost. And, you know, I mean, I know all the people that work in a lot of the programs that, you know, have been wonderful with hospice and home care and all these things. But when things get tough, they go away and then the net's gone. But with a community hospital and the community being involved with that, the net doesn't necessarily have to be gone. And I will give one personal intake because we're talking about expanding services. I was in Illinois and I broke my ankle. And, you know, 64 years old, the first broken bone I'd ever had. I was like, wow, I can't believe this. Broke my ankle. And immediately I called over to Dr. Schwarting at, you know, Bone and Joint because he is my go-to guy. He was my go-to guy. I worked with him at Search. And I said, you know, they can stabilize it. I can come back to Bartlett, surgery and everything with regards to it. He looked at the x-rays, he looked at everything and he said, yeah, we can do it. We can do it one day in and out of the hospital. But there's no way that you will receive the home care that you will need with regards to rehabbing, because you're not going to be able to be on that leg and there's no home health care. And hospice and home health care was working, but they were strapped. So yes, I think, wouldn't it be nice if we could have the surgeries done and everything, but if the continuum of care is not there, it's lost. And so I chose to be back in Illinois so I could have my sisters take care of me, you know, and I could be, you know, and have that home healthcare. So that I think is really very important. And because what we have and what, you know, I'm sure the doctors can talk about is the ones that travel out and then come back to Juneau and there isn't the care. And so now you're having to deal with the complications because that was not taken care of, or the rehab and all the aftercare from the surgery because they popped up to Anchorage or they went down to Seattle. It's not there in Juneau. And then you have problems and complications, which now become an emergency room visit, or it's something that, you know, physicians have to deal with. So I think that that's.
I just want to.
I'm sorry.
Thank you so much for your comments. We got some.
I'm sorry.
There too. And this is now our comment period. And usually we allow 3 minutes. I should go where.
Oh, I apologize. You didn't start out with that.
It's okay. I did.
It's okay, Karen.
I did.
Sorry.
And I really didn't want to cut you off, but I wanted
Oh,
to
no,
be
no, no, no. That's
respectful of
all right.
everybody's time.
I only have one last comment.
Okay, go ahead.
Substance abuse disorder and mental illness are diseases just like cancer, just like everything else, and we need to deal with that in a continuum as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are starting our comment period now, and we'll give everybody 3 or 4 minutes. We're not gonna cut anybody off, but we want to be respectful of everybody's time. So when I call you up, please come up here and again, state your name and where you're from. If anybody's online, just raise your hand. You can also type in the chat that you want to make a comment. We got people monitoring that too. If you want to make a comment in the chat, we'd be more than glad to read it too as well. So first up is Aaron.
Thanks again. My name's Aaron. I appreciate the move to sit over here.
I know.
I think this is a nice move. Good leadership. I live in North Douglas. I think the relevant stuff about me as it pertains to this conversation, I've received mental health services for 25 years. They've saved my life. I'm also the executive director of NAMI Juneau, the Juneau Suicide Prevention Coalition. And one thing that I do is answer 150 or 200 phone calls and emails per year from people asking how to get mental health services in Juneau. And I think my ask for you all today is to think about the crisis services the same way that you're talking about and characterizing the home health and hospice services. And that little blue box at the bottom of the crisis services page have the same gusto about a commitment to continuing those, whether they're at Bartlett or elsewhere, that you're expressing for home health and hospice. I understand that financial situations are what they are. There's no getting around that. I'm not lobbying for you all to pay extra money. I'm not necessarily lobbying for Bartlett to keep these services, but ensuring that these services exist are vital for all the reasons that we heard. And I think part of the rationale that I'm seeing, and maybe I'm like extrapolating too much into it, is that there isn't need based on the fact that only 24 people have received those services. That doesn't speak to the demand whatsoever. I know from speaking with first responders, GPD, CCFR, they're responding to multiple behavioral health crisis calls each day. I get those calls regularly. The last thing I did before I left work today at 4:45 was speak with someone who said that she wanted a crisis stabilization program. She's an adult, so she could not get the help that she needs right now. And there is no other comparable service in Juneau. So like when JPD responds to a call and it's a behavioral health crisis, they can really only offer a conversation with that person. That's it. And if the person meets the narrow band of criteria to go to the MHU, then JPD can either offer to help them get there or force them to get there. But there is no other crisis service that exists. So JPD then leaves and says, so long, see ya. And that sucks. And they know that sucks. And so I hope that you all are speaking with them and speaking with CCFR as you're making these decisions about what your recommendation is. As I don't want to speak for anybody else, but my strong hunch is that they have strong opinions that this crisis service is. And like, there is movement in Juneau to create a crisis continuum of care. Crisis Now is a national model. Our state is pretty late in implementing it, and Juneau in particular is late in implementing it. But there is movement being done at the dispatch level and to create a mobile crisis team to go out and respond in the community to behavioral health crises, but without a place for somebody to go, it still is a very limited service that doesn't do the most important thing. So my strong hope for you all is that you see that crisis service as something important, as something that is worth pursuing instead of some new square footage in a building to do as you see fit. I think that you all inherited a financial situation that no individual person here created, but I think you also inherited an obligation to provide that service. Bartlett Hospital said that Bartlett Hospital would be the provider of that crisis stabilization service. And to give that up and to give up the millions of dollars that have been put into it from the trust sets our community back even farther. So I hope that you all continue and honor that commitment to pursue that as a service that is worth existing in our community, regardless of whether it is from you all or somebody else. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks, Aaron.
Rebecca, I live outside of downtown. It might not look like it, but I hate public speaking. I'm just very passionate about these service lines, and it's a very stigmatized disease, so it's important for me to speak up and give voice. And I think after hearing this, you might understand why I believe in advocacy so strongly. So according to a study published in 2017, nearly half of all Americans have a family member or close friend with addiction. As many of you know, the statistics for prevalence of addiction has skyrocketed exponentially since that study was completed. If I were to ask the individuals in this room how many have been touched personally by addiction to raise their hands, I believe most of us in this room would raise our hands. As someone who falls into this statistic I shared above, I am going to share a personal story with you. I was 6 years old the first time my oldest brother, Jonathan, was hospitalized for psychosis at 10 years old. John was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome and bipolar disorder at this time. For the rest of my childhood, our family struggled to survive financially and emotionally due to the cost and difficulty of accessing care. Thanks to the advocacy of my mother, as well as living in a suburb of metropolitan Buffalo, New York, with accessible behavioral health care options, my family was able to access services which saved John's life. I got a call during finals week of my first year of college letting me know that John was missing. Later, I was updated that John was being admitted to the hospital due to a psychotic break. I thought he'd been doing well. He finally had his own place and had just finished college. It didn't make sense. I was told that he had left work in the middle of the day, never returned, and didn't show up the next day. No one could find him. When he was eventually located, he endorsed an established plan and was on his way to drive across the country to complete suicide. He had several firearms in the car with him. Upon further examination, the psychiatrist treating John determined that his psychotic break was likely set into place as a result of him drinking a fifth of vodka every night and consuming large amounts of uncontrolled marijuana to try and manage his mental health symptoms and get some sleep. I was warned and prepared by my parents that I should be ready to hear the news soon that my brother lost his battle with mental illness. This broke my heart. My family continued to advocate for care for John despite fearing the worst outcome. John was later diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder and received medication management which helped him to treat his co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders. It has saved his life. I'm so happy to report that John is doing well these days and is married to the most supportive and loving social worker, Allison. She helps to keep him active with care and on top of his medications. If any of these situations were to unfold in a community which didn't have immediate access to skilled behavioral health care, I imagine John's story would have ended differently. The story of many families like mine and people like John will end differently if the recovery network is dismantled and RRC closes. The other recovery services available in Southeast Alaska are not comparable. Please allow time to find a solution to RRC's funding gaps, whether that be through city subsidization or other means. If we make the mistake of closing the service, lives will be forever impacted and some lost forever.
Thank you for sharing your story. Dr. Peterson.
I have a few comments. I answered a question earlier, but I have a few comments, and they have to do with my career here. I did my first ER shift in August of 1989, so I've got that longer perspective of being here. but I'm also here to talk a little bit about hospice. And I want to thank you all for having this forum. I think it's fantastic. I want to talk a little more broadly than some of these folks have talked about. Because when you look at the papers here, you know, it's been in K2 and whatnot. I want the board to really think about the language that the hospital is using. And I think it's super, super important. When we say non-core things, you know, a lot of people in the community don't even know what that is. And so but when you hear that said, and when you hear it said it's an enterprise fund, it almost kind of sounds like, well, look, we're not the ski area. We're not the ice rink. I mean, I know those are defined as enterprise funds by the city, but we are clearly different from them. And I think we have to be really careful about the language that we use. Now, I would rather use words like sustainability and, you know, partnering with other assets, just like the Juneau Community Foundation is in discussion with the hospice folks about, you know, getting us some extra money. But I think that it kind of looks like, at the optics, I've heard from several people, it looks like the board is just washing their hands of it. So like, city, if you want to pay for it, that's great. Otherwise, it's out of here. And I really believe that for sustainability, there's probably a middle ground. And so, for example, so hospice is considered a non-core item. I think it's a part of healthcare. We're trying to do wet handoffs. We would like people who are leaving the hospital to see our hospital caretakers before they even leave the facility, meet the family. Because it's called a hot or a wet handoff. And when you do that, you make these connections with these families, and then you can make that happen. It also gets people out of the hospital quicker because there is a cost to the hospital. I don't think hospice is going away, but we've had a lot of people who should have been in hospice dying in this hospital over the years, holding up beds. Meanwhile, locals who have pneumonia or sepsis get flown to Anchorage or Seattle because we don't have beds. I think we just have to be aware of how that all looks on the outside. The other thing I spoke with you all last November about when I was lucky enough to get an award here was about our employees at the hospital. You know, we're living in a time of uncertainty, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and people are worried. Our employees are worried. Like, am I gonna have a job? One guy moved here from Tennessee to make this happen, and I think we really have to be paying attention to that. And I know you're moving toward a solution at the end of the month, but I think we really have to show what is our commitment, what's our sustainability plan, and how is that going to look? And I think it's really important how we do that with the media. And I also know that recruiting came up here earlier. It's hard to recruit people here. We know that search is poaching our patients, okay? And we know that search is not paying their fair wage. So I know my 3 minutes are up, but I just want to say one thing. In my 30 years in the ER, search has not paid their fair way. And I'm going to name the elephant in the room. I could take care of a patient for 4 hours, drugs, lab tests, IVs, whatever. If it's alcohol related, they don't pay us a penny. They don't have to. And I think they need to be called out. They're not paying for RRC. And when they took over in Sitka, they bought Hospice Home Health and they closed it. Okay. And 3 or 4 private practice doctors went out. So I agree with all the comments of maintaining a community hospital, but let's look at the optics. Let's think about our employees. And thank you so much for listening to all of us.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. Does anybody else in the room want to make any more comments?
Hi, my name is Al Bolalong. I still get the military. I just want to say, you know, in the military, we call it continuity. And when you do continuity, you serve with courage, integrity, and you serve. So it's almost like the point man. Point man is Bartlett. You get a hospice, you get RRC, you get all those elements. So it's almost like an infantry group, a 6-man team. So like the female was the lady was mentioning when she left, it's almost like a circle. Almost like a circle. So when we're marching and doing, right now we're in a crisis economically and trying to get some things happening and all that. But my comment is that let's work as a team. There's always a solution. I know you folks have the decision. Make the right decision because you're a point man. You're the leader, and once you're the leader, you will affect the community. And I know Bartlett loves the community and the panel and CEO, sir. And it's like for me, I was in the Ranger Battalion. I was a squad leader, and I look for my men, and they look for me too. So everybody just work together. Whatever the solution it is going to be like that. And hopefully what decision is going to benefit here in Juneau, the residents. Thanks.
Thank you.
Didn't actually prepare anything to say, but I have been listening to a lot of the words spoken about home health and hospice, and it reminded me of when I first finished high school. I did an apprenticeship as a nursing assistant. 6 months of that were in a gastroenterology and rheumatology ward. That's my original connection to substance use. I watched people fail in their cycles. But I also spent 6 months with district nursing. I spent 6 months on foot, in buses, in cars, driving around East London, going to see people who couldn't get into the clinic for their post-surgical care. Man in his 20s, but someone goes to his home. Someone who has quite severe dementia, and a nurse needs to go and make sure that she has her meds so there is not a critical event down the road. Or someone who has some other learning disability or other disability where their colostomy bag needs to be changed by skilled nursing care, and that can't be a clinic visit. Bartlett, having ownership of these facilities, has an opportunity for what I know in England as integrated healthcare systems. Obviously, as has been described, Juneau does not currently have a central party responsible for the welfare of this community. Juneau has repeatedly stated to this community that it wants to be that central party. It has the opportunity to do so with home health and hospice, to offload, as described by other parties here, practices that were already standard in other states, in other countries, saying, hey, you can go home and we'll send someone to you with a blood pressure machine, whatever else we need to just check if it's still okay. I don't know what the full capacity is of home health here, full capacity is of palliative care with hospice, but this is the opportunity to have an integrated process. And we're just starting. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, does anybody else have any more comments? So does any board member want to give any comments?
Well, I of course, I read the comments that we received, and I was disappointed that I don't think we got across our point to some of the people who commented. And their comments seem to be approaching us as if our decision was like the decision we would make if we were trying to decide whether to put on the green shirt or the brown shirt today when we go out. These decisions we have before us aren't like that. They're like the decision we would have if we're going to drive on a long car trip and we don't have any gas in the car and we don't have any money to buy gas. The decision we have to make is to figure out how we can partner with someone who gives us these resources. It's not our decision whether to just close these things or not. The hospital is only here and can only provide these services if we get the resources to pay the people who are providing them. And I think everyone here, the comments that we had here tonight were really reflected that, or they reflected an understanding of what our problems are. But I don't think that we got our message out to people who sent in our written comments. So I guess I see somebody from the paper over there typing away. I guess I would ask too that the paper help us try to speak to the public and help them really understand what the problem is that we have before us.
Anybody else? That's great. So before we adjourn, I just want to thank everybody online and everybody that's in the room here for coming and spending these 2.5 hours with us and giving us your frank input on what you feel and telling us personal stories and everything. This is really going to help us be able to put together our input to make sure that we are able to present this to the assembly and really know what the community wants for this hospital going forward. So I just want to really let you know that we really appreciate that. I also want to thank the board very much for coming tonight too. And I know you guys will be here Monday and I know that we've gone through this several times and I just really appreciate you guys taking the time to learn that. The administration, Kim first, and Ian and Joe, thank you guys very much for how much work you've done. And Max, thank you as the finance chair for really working with us and getting us through this. And of course, Deb, our vice president, is awesome. Is really appreciate all the work that you've done helping do this. So again, remember, tell your friends that our comment period is open. I know it says till the 19th, but really we can take comments up to the finance meeting on the 24th of June. So you just keep emailing them using our website. That's the best way to do it. I can guarantee you that this board will read every single thing that is sent to them. I know they do that. Our next meeting will be Monday at 5:30. So please tell people no, they can come online and do anything else like that. With that,
Mr. Chair, can
Yes.
I just recognize Aaron also for setting up all these meetings and putting the information out there? It was a big job, so big thank you.
Aaron back there. Thank you, Aaron, for keeping us on script. Even though I keep missing it. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And you do
Thank you,
have
Shelley.
one acknowledgement.
And of course, I want to thank Anita for always keeping everybody straight and keeping all these meetings going too. I don't see anything in the chat.
Rachel said, thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, that was a jerk.
Thank you. I didn't see it. Thanks. With that, everybody, thank you very much. We are adjourned.